Do you think that a few Iranian drones are going to get in the way of the next installment of Balabatish Questions? Well, that, my friends, is, wait for it, a Balabatish question. In part 1, Zevi Reinitz and I discussed the big picture of identity. In part 2, we spoke more practically about self-talk. And today, we segue into jealousy. Are we more jealous today than in the past? Is jealousy a main driver of negative self-talk? Can jealousy possibly play a productive role in our lives as a Ben Torah? All this and more in this week's conversation. At the end of this week's episode, I will share a question that has bothered me for years with the hope that you, dear listener, might help me gain some clarity. Thanks again to the Ian Institute for sponsoring this series. My name is Yaakov Wolff, and this is Shtark Tank. So for the third installment of this little series here that we're doing, I want to just pick up on where we left last time. We spoke about comparing yourself to others. We spoke about self-esteem. And I'll just pick up on the statistic that you mentioned early on in the conversation, which is this 80% negative self-talk. So we don't really have great data as to how things were in the past, but there certainly are plenty of indications that nowadays specifically we have lower self-esteem, more negativity in our internal worlds as in before. And I wanted to ask you what you make of that. You know, social media is obviously a big one, but even before social media, we could quote Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, Zechron Levracha, who really started his career well before social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these things. And he said very clearly that every single book he wrote is about the same topic, and that is self-esteem. So what do you make of that? Why do you think that nowadays specifically self-esteem is a bigger challenge than maybe in the past?
So that's a big question, and I love that. I love that that's what he said, because I think that that's true for everybody. Everybody's book that we're all writing, we're all kind of writing the book of our day-to-day, our lives, our path. It all boils down to a large extent, to what do you think about yourself? Like how much do you love and respect and value yourself and your contribution? And I think that's in a meta way, that's just like that is, you know, the full stop. That's like the goal at the end of the day, is just to be okay and to feel like you're enough. But in this context, why is that the case? I would throw out, let's say, 2 points as a suggestion. The first is what I alluded to, I think, in one of our previous conversations, which is that, you know, in, I guess, a negative way, we've built society like this. Like, I mean, society is just built at the moment to be displaying what I've done, and then to kind of compare ourselves to other people. I mean, again, that's social media, and that's that's a lot of what we have done in the world today in 2024 is simply assessing where other people are, or where society thinks I should be, and where I'm holding on that kind of arbitrary measuring stick. So that, I think, just doesn't put us as people growing up in this generation. It doesn't put us in a great position to be able to avoid it, because we were just constantly comparing ourselves. That's the way that we're wired. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there's actually maybe a more optimistic theory that you could float, and this is something which I've been reading about recently, and that was in the context of, I guess, what we call imposter syndrome. People talk about this thing called imposter syndrome, where I feel like I'm not good enough. I'm in a certain context. I'm in a certain job role or yeshiva or whatever it is, and I just don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I'm enough. And somebody recently that I was reading wanted to argue the point that counterintuitively, real imposters don't feel imposter syndrome. Meaning, if you're feeling imposter syndrome, if you're feeling like you're not adequate enough, you're not good enough, it probably means that you are doing something right. I think that, to frame that in the context of yeshiva, we've built a system for ourselves as a community where we are pushing kids, pushing students, pushing Balabatim, boys, girls, men, women, to succeed. And we're doing a good job that people are surrounding themselves with other successful, motivated, smart, talented people. And naturally, if you're going to be surrounded by other smart, successful, talented, capable people, the self-doubt is going to creep in, because you're going to look around and you're going to say, they're really talented. Maybe I'm not as talented as them. But you're thinking that only because you're one of the talented group. And naturally, that limited scope that you have right now is kind of breeding this self-doubt and this comparison. But I think it's important to just take a break sometimes and realize that while the feeling itself might not be serving me, it's coming from a place of, I'm actually doing great. Look at how far I'm in the top shir. I'm in the great yeshiva. I've spent 12 years. I have so many skills, and so it's important to, I think, appreciate both sides, both the negative side, which is like stop comparing, and also the positive, opportunistic side, which is like, but wait a second, that also means that maybe I'm on the right track, and maybe I'm doing better than I'm giving myself credit for.
Yeah, it's somewhat more clearly defined in other contexts. If you think about like the last guy on the bench of an MLB team, so he's in the MLB and he's the last guy on the bench. So that's a little bit more of a clearly defined Zanav La'arayos to bring in Pirkei Avos, which is that you're very clearly on the best team in the best league that there is in the world, but you're also very clearly the last guy on that depth chart.
I would be very interested I never thought about it like that, but I love that. I love that mashal, and I would be very interested to see if anybody's ever done a study like that of like the what's the psyche, what's the motivation of like the 12th man on every NBA team, or like the guy, the pitcher that never pitches in the MLB team. I'm really interested to know how they stay motivated, how they look at themselves in the context of. My suspicion, this is my guess, just based on like sports psychology, which I think you can learn a lot from, is that those people continue to tell themselves that they are A+, A grade, just waiting for my next opportunity. I am amazing. I am great. They're probably not, letting the negativity seep in. They're probably more of like looking at, look how far I've come, look how much adversity I've overcome, look how great I am. I'm just going to keep pushing and keep working to keep striving. That's my guess.
I think just to add one more point to this, 2024 psychology, why do people have so much negative self-talk, which is how we open this conversation. 80% negative thoughts feels like a lot. And how do we get to that point? Just to put a pin on it and to understand where this is coming from, is that even before social media, where we saw my friend's vacation, we had mass media where television, radio, Madison Avenue was trying to sell us on these dreams of fancy cars, fancy vacations, whatever it might be. And, Rav Sachs has a great line. He says, the consumer society, I quote, is constantly tempting us all the time to spend money we don't have, to buy things we don't need for the sake of happiness that won't last. So I think all these things really contribute to this mentality that we have to deal with. And in our next chapter, we'll just talk a little bit more about halacha l'maaseh, like what does that mean in the Torah sense? Where does that leave us? And what should we be doing in order to have the right approach, the right mindset that will really help us build as Bnei Torah? So if we're going to talk about comparing ourselves to others in Torah. So last time we spoke about self-esteem and comparing ourselves and some of the broader psychological phenomenon that play into our lives nowadays. But when it comes to Torah, so we really find these two approaches. We find that comparing ourselves to others can be a very, very negative force, but we also find that comparing ourselves to others can be a positive source. So let's just maybe review some of the relevant Mar Makomos. So one of the famous ones is a Gemara in Baba Basra, which says the famous line, Kina sofrim tar b'chachma. So if you have two Talmidei Chachamim and they're jealous of one another, so that pushes them to learn more. Another source is in Rashi al Torah, where the pasuk says in Parshas Vayetze that Rachel was jealous of Leah, but tikanei Rachel b'achota. So she was jealous. Like we thought, lo tachmon is a big isser, it's a big problem. But Rashi says, kina b'maseh hatovim. So what is Rashi saying? He's saying that why is it so bad to be jealous? So the Ibn Ezra has this famous line in Parshas Yisro where he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives everyone different things in life. So if I am jealous of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave someone else, so I'm basically saying like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mistreating me. And that's chas v'shalom to say such a thing. So by internalizing the emunah HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives each person what they need, so I will obviously not be jealous. So great. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed Leah with children. So it would make no sense to be jealous of Leah of having that bracha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what could there be jealousy of? Well, if Leah had Masim Tovim and that was what drove her bracha, so I could be jealous of the fact that she was able to really be a good person, to have good midos, and that is not something which is in the realm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's bracha that, I should not be heretical to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should have blessed me and not her or whatever it may be, but it's within our realm of Bechira, and if someone else is able to do it, maybe there I could be jealous, because it's not with HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving different people different things, it's about me and my own decision. So maybe that source also indicates that jealousy is appropriate or healthy in the sense of when it comes to my own ambitions and my own efforts. So I could be jealous of someone else being successful in those efforts.
Yeah, and it's complicated because you have other Mar Makomos also. You have, for example, the Mishnah in Avos that says that Kina type of kavod motzinas adam min olam. So that would seem to suggest that jealousy, by its very definition, is a terrible thing. So, which one is it? Is it a great thing, or how do I pick and choose? How do I be jealous and turn it on, turn it off here or there? Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing? In Torah, not in Torah? How do I draw the line? And I guess, it sounds like it's a theme, like a recurring theme in a lot of the topics that we've discussed, which is that on the one hand, it's not a simple answer. It could be that there is a place and a time and a benefit to having some sort of what you'd call jealousy. But it can't be a blanket statement. It can't always just be, I'm going to be jealous of this, because if it's just ungated and unguarded, it becomes counterproductive, and it becomes damaging to a person when it starts affecting their ability to function and to grow in a natural way. So you really have to kind of look at it from a nuanced perspective and apply the dosage as needed, because it's not a blanket statement this way or that way. It really has to be something which is appropriate for the person, the situation, and all of the variables, which there are many.
Yeah, and that lashon of Pirkei Avos of motzinas ha'adam min ha'olam is very interesting. Like, what does that mean? What's your take on that?
So I always read that in those three things: kina, taiva, and kavod. I'm not sure this is Pashup Pshat, and off the top of my head, I don't remember all of the Mefarshim there, but I always read that as almost being literal. If I am focused on kina, of being jealous of somebody else because of what they have, what they've achieved, if I am jealous of, if I'm looking at kavod, I want honor from somebody else, or taiva, I have a certain desire for a certain thing. Those are those are things which are external to me. All three. I'm looking for some sort of input. I want something from the outside. I need kavod from somebody else. I have a taiva for something outside of myself. I'm jealous of something that I haven't achieved, or something. What that does, what those perspectives do, all of them, they remove a person from his ability to be kind of in the moment, present, satisfied with his own life. Your world, we all have our own worlds. My world and your world, it's not voodoo, right? It's real. My experience in this world is very different than my neighbor, than the next one. I have my family, and my eyes and my glasses are different than the next person. My job and my upbringing, my parents, my family. And so if I am jumping the fence to somebody else's world and saying, I want what they have, I need the kavod from them, I'm not good enough unless I get this, input, I'm literally taking myself out of my ability to function in my world. I'm not present anymore. I'm living in somebody else's dream world, and that just has a cascading effect on everything that I'm doing. I'm no longer living in my world because I'm dreaming, living, desiring some other external benefit or factor that I have zero control over.
So that leads to a really interesting question, which is that in the end of the day, after 120, each and every one of us has to answer to only one HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu probably doesn't care at all what my chavrusa accomplished, what my friend accomplished. That means nothing. In that conversation of what did you accomplish, it's only you and your potential. When I was a kid, in my dentist office on Beacon Street in Brookline, so at one point they installed this Mario Kart game, and it was really cool that you used to race around the track once, and on the second lap, you used to see this shadow of your first lap. And you're basically racing as like a time trial sort of thing, where you're basically racing against what you did in the previous circle. So I like that imagery a lot, which is that it's going to be you and what you could have accomplished. And that's very scary in a certain sense, but it's also just like what everyone else is doing makes absolutely no difference in that context, on the one hand. On the other hand, we're social creatures. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in this world, all people around us. And is that all just like a Yetzer Hara? The fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put me next to a great lamdan who's way smarter than I am and way more talented than I am, is that just like a Yetzer Hara that I need to be shutting off and like not thinking about it at all? Or do we just have to be able to thread that needle of using it as much as it's helpful and shutting it out when it's not? Yeah,
I think it's a complicated question, because like it's so simple to say, and it's so simple to kind of draw these lines between apply as needed and just take it for every situation as for what it needs, every person for what he or she needs. But it's tough, and like you said, we're social creatures, we're comparative creatures. We do size up our own successes based on what other people have done or what we think we need to do. And so Rabbeinu Yonah on that Mishnah in Pirkei Avos makes two 2 points which I think are helpful to mention. The first is he says that when it comes to kinas ofrim, when it comes to looking at somebody else's accomplishments, so there's basically two functions that can serve. There are 2 ways you can translate that into your own head. One is to say, Yaakov is so amazing in learning, and I want to be like Yaakov. I mean, I gotta be as smart as him. I have to be as talented as him. I'm upset that I'm not as well spoken as him, or whatever it is. That is maybe motivating in the moment, but it's probably not sustainable. It's probably going to get a person down. The other more nuanced approach is to be motivated kind of generally from what the other person is doing, to be inspired by a person and the way that they're accomplishing, the way that they're handling themselves, and to say, how do I translate that back into my own experience? I want to be, more dedicated to my learning because Yaakov is so dedicated to his learning. Yaakov wrote his Sefer of Chidushei Torah. I want to write my Sefer of Chidushei Torah. There is a disconnect at some point in the thought process, says Rabbeinu Yonah, between the inspiration, the kina, and what it means in your own kind of personal experience. It's not I just want to run after and be like him. No, I want to be inspired by him so that I can be more like myself. I can be a better version of myself. And that's not just lip service. That's an important kind of habit to get into, a mental habit to get into in terms of comparing yourself to others. That's the first point Rabbeinu Yonah makes. The second point Rabbeinu Yonah makes, which is maybe the most important, is he writes at the end, or towards the end of his paragraph here, he says, after all is said and done, I'm reading from Rabbeinu Yonah, Ach yoser hi shaveh. It's more worthwhile im belo kina chafetz be'ele. It would be a lot better. You can take all the motivations and you get all of your external cues, but the best thing to do is to not look out of your window at all. Just be happy with yourself. The best thing to do is to learn Torah without the kina, to be self-motivated because you value your own contributions and your own kochos. That, says Rabbeinu Yonah, after all the Ma'amari Chazal and all the pilpul and all the comparisons, at the end of the day, better to be without it. Better to not have to listen to the podcast episode. Better to just be shuling with yourself and just not have to be anxious about it. Just do you.
At the end of this segment, we came to the conclusion that while there could be a place for jealousy being a source of motivation to get to the right place, the ideal state of affairs is to just be yourself and don't worry about anybody else. Now, there seems to be a Gemara that seems to run counter to this. The term famous Gemara is usually overused, but I think in this case it's justified. We're talking about the Gemara in Maseches Yoma, on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis, which says as follows: Taner Rabbanan, Ani ve'ashir ve'rasha ba'in ledin, la'ani omrim lo mipnei ma lo asakta b'Torah. So 3 people come in to receive judgment in heaven. One is poor, one is rich, and one is wicked. And if the Ani says that he didn't learn enough Torah because he was too poor, and that caused him too much stress and strain on his time in order to learn, the Gemara says the response will come as follows: Im omer ani haiti v'tard b'mzonosai, omrim lo klum ani haita yoter mi Hillel. Were you any poorer than Hillel? And then the Gemara goes on to describe the tremendous dedication of Hillel, who received a meager salary, set aside half for his own family's needs, and the other half was used to pay tuition to the Beis Medrash to go and hear Divrei Elokim Chaim from Shmaya and Avtalyon until he got locked out of the Beis Medrash, got stuck in the cold, v'chule v'chule. And then the Gemara goes on, and if you're rich, you'll be asked, well, you're not any richer than Rebbe Lezer ben Charsom. And if you are wicked or you have a lot of tavos, you're in no more of a dangerous situation than Yosef HaTzadik. And then at the very bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Beis, the Gemara concludes and says, Nimtza, Hillel mechayiv es ha'aniyim. Rebbe Lezer ben Charsom mechayiv es ha'ashirim. Yosef mechayiv es ha'rashayim. And I don't understand. What does it mean to be a mechayiv? How could it be that some of the greatest Jews who have ever lived are the measuring stick for each and every one of us? If each and every one is supposed to be their own individual person, have their own challenges, their own opportunities, their own strengths, their own weaknesses, so how could it be that the successes of some of the greatest Jews that ever lived serve as a mechayiv? What does that mean? I'm really curious in hearing your take. I have a few ideas, but none of them that I really love. So please, if you have any thoughts on this topic, send me an email, send me a WhatsApp. The links are in the show notes. And as always, thank you again so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in to Shtark Tank. Please make sure to leave a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us grow the show. Until next time, keep on steiging, Chevra.